A bill to exempt the Nigerian police force from the contributory pension scheme, like their counterparts in the military, is coming up for a public hearing on November 19, 2024. According to proceedings on the floor and some protests by retired police officers, the reason for this agitation and subsequent passing of this bill was to ensure that the police are on the same footing with their other security counterparts in the military and intelligence agencies, as the police are also an important part of Nigeria's security architecture. However, in the recent past, the federal government issued a white paper where the police were strongly advised not to toe this line of action, essentially because of the unpleasant burden and the huge financial implication it will have on the government. Joining us now on this show is Oguche Agudah, CEO of the Pension Fund Operators Association of Nigeria, PENOP. Good morning, Mr. Agudah. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Dr. Batsi.
Okay, quickly, help us define the problem.
Yeah.
A statement of the problem. Now, the police, they're saying, oh, if you are a retired CP, you get about 80,000 because it's a contributory pension scheme. A superintendent of police gets about 35,000 at the end of the month.
Yeah.
So they say they want an arrangement the same for the military and the other security agencies. Where is actually the problem? Because under the contributory pension scheme, you can take your money in bulk at a certain point if you are qualified.
Yeah, so I think the issue is there's a lot of emotions in it. Of course, when it comes to pensions, pay, there's a lot of emotions. And there's a lot of half-truths and misinformation. So I think it's good to set the record straight. Number one is the fact that no matter what kind of scheme you are on, if your salary is low, your pensions will be low. You can have a low salary and have a high pension. So that's one angle. And we've advocated a lot of the times for the police, in order for them to have high pensions, the salary needs to be increased. And I know that there's a lot of work going on around that, minimum wage and all of that. Number two is that in all the complaints, you haven't heard any of the police say, I haven't gotten my pensions. That used to be the case in the past. But right now, the pensions are coming. Some people will say it's low, and we'll get to that, but the pensions are coming every month. Every month, you get the pensions, and that's the beauty of the contributory pension scheme, because it's funded. What the police are agitating for is to go back to the unfunded situation, whereby it's dependent on government budgets, government allocation, and then the police pension is managed through the public sector. Right now, pensions are managed by private sector pension fund managers, who that's their job. So the issue is multidimensional, but I guess the main challenge is that the police want to go to the defined benefits, which is not funded based on budget allocations, which the military are operating. And the thing is that, you know, when you hear that the grass is greener on the other side, it's because they pay higher water bills. So the military are really not enjoying it the way that it's been spoken of. As a matter of fact, recently we've heard of the military protesting and asking for pensions to be paid. Because under the defined benefit scheme, what happens is that you need to ensure that there's money. You need to ensure that somebody is getting the funds from you, right? So what happens is that even the military are not having it all their way. So we don't think that that's the best way to go, because it's not sustainable. If we want to go back to the defined benefit scheme, based on about the 380,000 to 400,000 police officers, the government will have to make a 3.5 trillion investment today that earns at least 10% every year in order to meet those obligations. And that 3.5 trillion is outside of the budgetary allocations already for today. So I guess those are the issues at play.
All right. Having said that, I've just read your paper, and, you know, at some point when you're making your recommendations, you're also noting the fact that the CPS itself is also not perfect, and it has its own challenges and its own issues. So what's the fair middle ground? Because, you know, as much as you're saying that, okay, they shouldn't pull out of the scheme, but you already know that the scheme itself has several challenges. So where do we meet halfway so that everything works? You've already expressed one of the challenges, which is the fact that salaries are low. You know, your pension is going to be low. So that's a challenge. But what are the other things that need to be tweaked? And is there a process that can be, that can happen to ensure that the scheme itself is tweaked so it can be more desirable?
Yeah. So there's no perfect system, and we iterate and get it better. So what has happened is the CPS has operated for 20 years. Before the CPS came, safety was an issue. If you Google corruption in Nigeria on Wikipedia, you will see Abdul Rashid Maina. that is pension boards. So pension boards don't work. So the police wants to go back to pension boards. Those things are a sleaze of corruption, right? So what is happening is that it's just as if you use your GSM phone, you want to call and you have drop calls, then you say you want to go back to NITEL. I remember queuing. So what we need to do is we need to see how we can make the system better. So what we are advocating is from the AIG upwards, Assistant Inspector General of Police upwards, when they retire, there are more political appointments, so they can go with 100% of their salary as pensions. For the other cadre of staff, what needs to happen is that when they retire, the government can actually give them gratuity. The CPS allows that, so that the money that they have contributed will just be used for their monthly pensions. You don't have to use their monthly pensions for their bulk payments. That way, they can get higher payments. And of course, salary increases. Some other MDAs, Ministry Department agencies like the Central Bank, NDIC, SEC, what happens is that they use part of their internally generated revenue to cushion some of the effects of the pension scheme. But if you pull down a system because you think it doesn't work for you, then you are going back. And I give the analogy, it's just like you are promoted to a senior manager and you now have a car. And you say, oh, you know, the cost of fueling the car is too much. I want to go back to trekking. What needs to happen is that we need to see how within the CPS we can make it better as opposed to pulling it down. Another analogy I'd like to give is you've got 5 children. And one child says, you know, I can see my friends going to school abroad, having cars. And daddy, I want to a school abroad, I want to have cars. And then you do all that to the first child, and the other children don't have money, and the company collapses. So what happens is that for one set of staff, we cannot change a whole system that is already contractually bound to help them.
Okay.
Yes.
Oguche, currently, there are some pensioners that still complain that they don't get their money under this scheme because federal government is not paying one part of the money it's supposed to be paying. Can you make clarity on that? Because they are not paying their money. I've still had a lot of police officers come to me. Secondly, this bill has been on for a while. In fact, I think this bill was pushed through the last assembly, and it was just for the president to assent, but he didn't assent on it. Now they've brought it again.
Yeah.
Is it that the lawmakers have not seen reason to prevail over them, and the conversation of the fact that it's going to increase governmental spending that is not there in the first place? And like you talked about Abdulrashid Mena, which that money is gone forever. You know, so what is that money federal government ought to be paying that they have not paid that is making some of these PFAs not to be able to make their obligations to the pension, because some pensioners are not being paid as we speak?
Yeah, you're correct. So there are about 10 million Nigerians who are on the pension scheme, who have their retirement savings account. And within that 10 million is like a 50-50 split, public sector, private sector. Anyone who's in the private sector, you don't hear them complaining of not getting their pensions. Many people from the private sector who retire, when they retire from day zero, they get their pension. So I'm working and I retire. The next month, my pension begins to get paid because my contributions are complete. Where you have issues are public sector, federal government funded pensions, and there's something called their accrued rights. Is their rights.
Okay.
So if you've worked with the federal government, and before 2004, there were some rights that you were owed based on your pensions. So when you retire, those rights are meant to be paid to you in addition to the contributions you have made. So the federal government has not met this on some occasions since about last year.
They've not been paying their accrued rights?
Yes, the accrued rights have not been paid. Even though last week there was a communication from the Minister of Finance that those rights will be cleared. So we're hoping that...
Have they been cleared?
Not as at
today. It's just a communication?
Yes, a communication.
But it's not been cleared?
Not yet. So for about a year, about 18 months, those accrued rights have been owed.
And so that means since this government came in, they have not paid accrued rights. I just want to get you right, because this government is 18 months old, isn't it?
Yeah.
So since President Tinubu's government came in, no accrued right paid.
Yeah. So okay. I think that goes to the heart of the issue in terms of budgetary allocation. So these are people who is their right, and money has not been paid because of budgetary allocations. Some set of people are saying, can you pay us extra, even though the people that have been budgeted for have not been paid? So it's something we need to look at holistically. And if I look at the PIF issue that we spoke about, where the Sovereign Wealth Fund, and Dr. Bati, you might remember, at some point Nigeria had excess crude accounts of about 25 billion, 35 billion. Some governors went to court and said, they sued the government and said, we need to spend the money today. 1 billion of that money was used for Sovereign Wealth Fund. Today, that money is generating a lot. Look at what's happening in Saudi and UAE. So in Nigeria, when we see money that has been pulled, we want to pull it down and spend it, not knowing that tomorrow is coming and we need to plan for the future.
Okay, let me ask you, we are not going yet. Why is it good for the military to exit from the contributory pension scheme, the military and other intelligence agencies, and it is not good for the police? After all, the common sense that we hear is that what is good for the goose is good for the gander. Why is it not good for the police? And then I would like you to summarize by telling us why it will be tragic for the police to exit from the contributory pension scheme, the same CPS that you say government has not been paying.
Yeah.
That is the issue. I know as a pension fund administrator, you will throw the argument to your side. But why is it that what is good for the goose is not good for the gander? Are policemen considered inferior?
Yeah, that's a good question. As a matter of fact, I'm talking as a Nigerian. As a matter of fact, what we are advocating for is even for the military to come back under the CPS, because the CPS offers transparency. If you go to the police pension website or any of the 19 pension websites, you'll be able to see how much they manage, how much they've paid. You know, corruption thrives in secrecy. And what we are saying is that, you know, one of the arguments the military made was that because of their intelligence and, you know, their data, it needs to be protected. And the argument is that, so are we going to get a bank for the military and the police? Are we going to get mobile networks? You shouldn't put them under a board. We're actually advocating for them to come back under the CPS. And the reason why it's going to be dangerous for the police to leave the CPS is, again, because the pension board they're advocating is going back to the defined benefit scheme, which is dependent on budgetary allocation. And, you know, if you look at the state governments, most of the state governments are not on the CPS. And when a new government comes, one of the election promises, I'll pay pensions. I'll pay pensions. It now depends on the magnanimity of the governor. We don't want that to happen. The CPS, you don't need to know anyone. You don't need to bribe anyone. Your money is there. It is yours. You can leave the organization and you still keep paying. So if the police leave, what will happen? Maybe 1 year, 2 years, they'll get paid. They'll be happy. But what happens if the government changes? What happens if the budget is not there? It's not funded. The defined benefit scheme is not funded, and you cannot guarantee payment. Under this CPS, it's funded. What we now need to do is to say, how can we increase the money they get on a monthly basis? Transparency is key if we want to move this nation forward. And some of the monies that we have amassed as pension funds, what needs to happen is that money needs to go into infrastructure, needs to go into investments. Because what will happen is that when people retire in Nigeria, everybody wants to buy a car. We never have enough roads for cars. Why don't we begin to think as a nation, let's get a transport system that works. Everybody wants to send their child abroad. Why don't we work on, let's get an education system that works.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Oguche, Agudah, thank you. We can feel your passion with regards to this, and a great argument that you've put forward for it. So we'll continue to see how the conversation unfolds.